Hi everyone, my name is Jenny Moreno, and today I will be presenting on the Colorado tick fever. So what is Colorado tick fever? Colorado tick fever is also known as mountain fever or mountain tick fever, and it is transmitted through the tick species Dermacentor andersoni, also known as the Rocky Mountain wood tick, and it inhabits areas of mountain ranges of 4,000 to 10,000 feet above sea level, and this is where these ticks are able to transmit the disease. The virus is part of the family Reoviridae and the genus Cultivirus. It is a non-enveloped virus with two outer shells, and it is 80 nanometers in diameter. It is also a double-stranded RNA containing 12 segments, and it is relatively large, actually, for an arthropod borne disease with 29,000 base pairs. So how is it transmitted? It is transmitted through a vector-borne disease, so it is not person-to-person contact. However, there is a rare case that I will mention in a moment. So it is zoonotic, and you have to be bitten by a tick that has already been infected with Colorado tick fever. So if you are bitten by a tick that does not have it, you will not receive the virus, but it needs to be infected. And so D. andersoni can actually be infected in any stage of its life, at larva, nymph, and adult. And once it is infected for life, and its saliva then becomes the means of which it infects other animals or humans. So initially, it receives the infection or the virus from sucking on small rodents that already have CTF virus in their bloodstream circulating, and then they are able to then get infected and infect others. It is very rare, but between 0 to 6 months after treatment, it is highly recommended not to donate blood because it can be possible to contract CTF through blood transfusion. So if someone in the past 6 months has been treated or has had cholera or tick fever, they are most likely that blood is still able to have the cholera tick fever virus within weeks or months after being treated. So this is why it's highly recommended not to donate blood during that time. So what are the signs and symptoms? So the incubation period is 1 to 14 days, and it is typically the symptoms begin on day 5 after being bit. It can be after, it can be before, but that is the average day of which most people or most cases receive onset symptoms. And the most common symptoms are fever, chills, headaches, muscle aches, and lethargy, which is also like lack of energy and fatigue and stuff like that. And then also another common thing is leukopenia, which is the decrease in white blood cells or leukocytes. And so this also can lead to more uncommon side effects such as sore throat, vomiting. It can also be possible that you feel dehydrated, abdominal pain, and then in very, very small, rare cases of 5 to 10% children were actually detected inflammation around the brain or spinal cord. This is also known as aseptic meningitis or encephalitis. And then this virus can also lead to in adults hepatitis. And then about in 50% of patients, they have a biphasic fever. This is just basically meaning that the fever comes in waves. So for 2 to 4 days, you might have fever, and then a couple days, the fever goes away, and then you get the fever again within the next couple days. It typically only happens in 2 waves like that. However, in some patients, it is continuous, depending on complications and things of that sort. In less than 20% of patients, they actually develop a maculopapular or petechial rash. So as you can see on the woman's back, that rash is covering most of her back. And it is possible that this rash can develop either near where the tick had bit you, or it can develop in other parts of your body since it is traveling through the bloodstream. So who are at risk? Those who are at risk are mostly those who are active outdoors and participate in outdoor activities such as camping, hiking, running, different things like that. If you're exploring mountain ranges, especially in the states where D. andersoni is most prevalent, or where they are most located, um, then you are more susceptible to this virus. Additionally, children. So children develop symptoms. They're mostly known to develop symptoms in the central nervous system compared to adults. So there is not really seen any cases where this has occurred. It has occurred mostly in children. So this can be scary at times to think about because it can lead to hospitalization. And then also to elderly, especially those with complications. So in 2018, there was actually a small little study of 4 cases that were being monitored of elderly people, 3 of which were men in their early 70s, like late 70s, and a woman who was in her late 50s. And they were all being treated for cholera tick fever. They all showed the same symptoms, and then some had more complications than others. So actually, 3 of them had to be hospitalized due to their complications. Since leukopenia is very common, it is harder to fight other diseases that you may have if you contract cholera tick fever. And then also those who are at risk are those who live in or visit western part of the United States and then southwestern part of Canada. So most of the states that you actually are able to see Dermacentor andersoni is Arizona, Colorado, Idaho, Montana, New Mexico, Oregon, South Dakota, Utah, and Wyoming. So just because they are most located in these areas does not necessarily mean that all the ticks located in these areas are positive for CTF. However, this is where the most cases are seen. So as you can see in the dark blue, this is counties with reported Colorado tick fever cases, and this was between 2010 to 2019. So, what can we do to prevent it? There are actually no vaccines readily available to prevent or treat CTF. However, it is highly recommended to use long sleeves or pants, and especially use EPA registered repellent. Um, this helps ensure that ticks do not attach to you. It is less likely for them to attach to you, especially when you have clothes on. Um, and then they also recommend, the CDC also highly recommends to treat clothing and gear with any products that contain 0.5% of permethrin, which is used to also prevent ticks from attaching to your clothes and gear. The potency actually survives with a couple washes, but it is recommended to keep repeating usage of it. And then lastly, thorough tick checks. So obviously, it is highly recommended to make sure to your to check your materials, your gear, and your body when you return from hiking or when you return from these mountain ranges, because it is most likely that you might have a tick attached to you that you might not notice. Especially in areas like behind the elbow, on your feet, on your legs, on your arms, maybe behind your ear. They can be found really in small places that you may not look. And then, as I mentioned before, obviously do not donate any blood within 6 months of having CTF, because it can live in the blood for about weeks or months on end. So it is possible that if you do donate blood and that blood is incubated, the virus can still live there for a couple months. So it is highly recommended to wait even longer than that if you are going to plan on donating blood after having contracted cholera or tick fever. So there's a small trigger warning, because I know some people do not like to see bugs and stuff like that. So another preventative measure is making sure to prevent ticks sticking to your pets. So there are no vaccines as well for pets. However, there are really good tick preventative products because ticks are already a common problem for um, for pets. So they definitely recommend also to thoroughly tick checking and bathing them immediately as well, to ensure that they do not have ticks on them, because then they are able to then grow in your backyard as well. So how to diagnose it? Based on the common symptoms, it's hard to diagnose it just on that alone, because the symptoms are so common to the flu or the common cold. So the common symptoms like fever, chills, headaches, things like that. it is very hard to just say, oh, you have Colorado tick fever because of this, because it's so common to other diseases and viruses. So they look at your travel history and they ask you and to see if you have traveled to any of the states where D. Andersoni is most present, and to see if there's a majority of those counties have a lot of positive cases where you might have been. And then also too, they look at leukopenia again. That is very common in most Colorado tick fever cases, and it is when there's a decrease in the leukocytes. So that is very noticeable as well. And then it is recommended if you show symptoms between 1 to 14 days, then you take a PT-PCR test, which is a reverse transcriptase polymerase chain reaction test for viral RNA of the virus. However, since antibody production for the virus is delayed 14 to 21 days, it is recommended that if you showed symptoms after 14 days or longer, to take an antibody test instead. So, what is the treatment? So, there are no medications or vaccines actually readily available to treat this virus. However, there you can use over-the-counter pen medication and stuff like that. You cannot use antibiotics because we know that antibiotics do not help treat viruses. However, taking over-the-counter pain medications such as Advil, Tylenol, getting a lot of rest, which will help reduce fever and help reduce headaches, getting a lot of fluids. And then if you do have rashes, possible creams for that. And then in very severe cases, in need of intravenous fluid or even higher doses of medication for those with higher complications. And this will aid in reducing pain or fever, especially when receiving fluids and resting. So the history on Colorado tick fever. So possible cases were actually first noted in 1855. However, they were overlooked because the literature showed, or people assumed, based on reading off the literature and all the symptoms that occurred, that it was just a mild case of Rocky Mountain spotted fever. However, in 1875, Assistant Surgeon Patsky spoke about a common fever going around that was more prevalent in certain areas, and they had started naming it or nicknaming it the mountain fever because it was near mountain areas. But it wasn't until 1930 that Becker first described Colorado tick fever and actually named it as the disease and categorized it as its own set. So he went through the past 11 months of data showing of different cases, and then people have diagnosed of other diseases as well, and actually saw that they had probably might have been misdiagnosed, and it was something new. So then he called it Colorado tick fever. And then it was later backed up in 1940 by James S. Culliford and Gordon E. Davis, where they monitored cases. They monitored cases reported to the U.S. Public Health Service between May 6th and June 4th of that year, and they were actually able to begin to form the idea that it was infected by D. Andersoni. And it was actually even later backed up by Lloyd Florio and Mabel Stewart Miller in 1948 when they actually conducted an experiment on hamsters. So they tried to isolate the causative agent from the tick to see that to make sure and prove that the tick was actually the cause of this virus. So they injected 2 hamsters, each with the same amount of the specimen, and one of the hamsters was injected with a positive tick, and the other was injected with one that was just from another small rodent. And it showed that in one it was inconclusive, and in the other that there was higher complications and may even lead to death. However, since it is a smaller rodent, it wasn't necessarily meaning that this was going to be true in humans. But this was the first experiment that was able to show that D. Andersoni was the cause. And then in the 1980s, cases were shown that they were actually underreported because they were confused with other infections. So there was actually only 1,400 cases reported in the US. However, there was a ton more in other places. And then in 2022, Carrie Padgett and 4 others are actually still reviewing current data from the past decades to try to see if if there's been a decrease, and there has been a decrease in cases. And then the recent news today. So it is encouraged to report the cases, but it is not required. And there has been 200 to 400 cases yearly.